Hey there, I'm Pete Townsend, and this is Money Never Sleeps. We look inside the minds of entrepreneurs and at the crossover of startups, enterprise, finance, technology, and life as we know it. As many of our listeners know, I lead the Techstars Web3 Accelerator, investing in entrepreneurs building in Web3 and enabling the next wave of growth in the decentralized internet and in tokenized economies. Applications are now open for our spring 2025 class, so check out techstars.com/accelerators/web3 to apply. Luis Ramirez is the co-founder and CEO of Mawari, a pioneer in cloud rendering and streaming technology. The team got started in Shibuya, about 20 minutes outside of Tokyo in 2017. And since then, the team have effectively built the foundation for the 3D internet. Mawari enables real-time 3D content streaming to spatial computing devices like the Apple Vision Pro and Meta Quest 3 through a global network of GPUs, leveraging Web3 elements such as DPIN, which is shorthand for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Network, to overcome the limitations of traditional centralized networks. Uniquely positioned to address one of the core challenges in the spatial computing industry, formerly known as XR, or extended reality, Mawari focuses on delivering scalable infrastructure for real-time 3D applications. Mawari has since launched the Mawari Network, a DPIN and the only full-stack spatial computing platform offering decentralized compute and storage resources optimized for AR/VR experiences. Just as a side note, and in the spirit of transparency, Mawari recently announced a closing of their $10.8 million strategic funding round, and I'm thrilled to be part of that round as an angel investor. In this episode, Luis and I riff on his journey from music to technology, the inception of the Mawari vision, building the team and overcoming challenges, the role of decentralization in the Mawari network, some of Luis's lessons learned from raising $17.3 million across 2 rounds in 3 years, and how to learn a new language while building technology with an immensely expansive vision. All right here on Money Never Sleeps. So, Luis, listen, I always find these interesting little snippets in people's backgrounds when I'm prepping for these interviews, right? I saw that you went to Berkeley College. That jumped out at me immediately because I've been outside of Berkeley before, but I saw that as one of your many university level pursuits and part of your background. Can you just connect the dots for me, being originally from Mexico, to Berkeley, the other things you did in music, and then on to Tokyo as kind of the starting point for this, yeah?
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting story. Okay, so yeah, at Berkeley, actually, they had a online course. That's the first point, that it was about music production. I started at a very early age actually making electronic music. I think since 15 or 16, I was playing with computers and just making electronic music. Then I kind of took it a little bit more seriously. So I took this course online because before starting my professional career, I was actually just doing music for music commercials. And that was my way of actually making ends meet when I was 18. So I was like, okay, so this is working out. So why don't I try a little bit more serious? And that's how I joined to Berkeley. But yeah, my roots are in electronic music, techno. So yeah, European music, UK, Germany. It's on my turf, like the BBC, Pete Tong, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, yeah. I had a good conversation a number of years ago with a friend who was talking about electronic music, and he's now blockchain. He's now in blockchain, in crypto. And we talked about the composability of electronic music and different tracks and laying the tracks on top of each other in the same way that in Web3, you are building on top of what came before you and the composability of Web3. And he saw that natural connection there between the whole ethos of Web3 and electronic music. So it's really interesting to hear that you've got this background in electronic music.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good way to say it indeed. So yeah, more on the music background and how I landed in Tokyo.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I'm originally from Mexico City. I lived there until I was 18. Then I temporarily moved to Germany, actually. And that's when I got more into techno electronic music, more in depth. Then after that, I lived for a short period of time in the US, and I started a job as a sound designer. So actually, yeah, just anything related to music commercials, to TV shows and video games. And that was my background that actually started getting more into tech because of that, because I just loved to play with digital audio workstations. And I had the chance to come to Japan in 2009. And it just blew my mind because I'm from a big city, Mexico City. I was living at the time in Texas. That it's very different than Mexico City. So then I arrived to Tokyo and it's like, wow, okay, so this is kind of like another planet. So I decided to move here and yeah, just find a way to stay here. And soon after, I got connected also to the electronic music scene here. My co-founder Takeo from Mawari, actually, he started one of the most iconic nightclubs here in Tokyo, Wilm, which is compared to Fabric or all these iconic clubs in the UK, you know?
Wow. Very interesting foundation from which to start building. One of the things that you mentioned in the recent post announcing Mawari's closing of your $10.8 million strategic round, and congratulations. It's a huge
Thanks.
lift. It's massive, and it's wonderful to be part of this with you as well. In the post on LinkedIn, where you're announcing the round, Luis, you said, and I'm going to repeat your words here from the quote, but 7 years ago, in the heart of Shibuya, Tokyo, we embarked on this journey with nothing more than a radical idea and an unshakable belief that the future of content is not inside a screen. It is frameless. A world where virtual objects seamlessly blend with our reality, transforming the way we interact with our digital and physical surroundings. Can you talk us through the inception point of that day back in 2017?
So I will tell you first the basic principle is you have frame media, right? And you see it in a static frame. But as we started seeing the VR headsets and also how resolution everything works, the display starts coming closer to you until it finally merges with your eyes, which is what we see in Minority Report and other movies, right? So then you become the media and the full environment around it. That's the basic principle. At the time, we were thinking, okay, so what's the future of media? Are websites gonna still exist? What is that shape? And we came up, okay, so websites will be just spaces. And it's very funny because, yeah, Meta just announced last week about having your digital space, right, with generative AI, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just very funny because it's exactly how I envision, like, okay, so instead of going to a website, you go to a place, which has some connection with the metaverse per se, but we were always thinking more in terms of mixed reality. Now, why we started thinking about this, my co-founder Takeo and I, back to the electronic music roots. In 2015, I mean, I was doing electronic music, doing some shows, but I felt something was missing in the Tokyo scene. Because I mean, I've been to Berlin, I've been to London, I've been to Manchester, so Bristol, etc. So I've seen a lot of electronic music scenes around the world. And I was like, okay, so maybe there's something that needs something like more experimental type of art. So there's this digital arts festival called Mutec, and that started 25 years ago in Montreal. So there's a similar festival called Sonar that is in Barcelona, which is quite famous now because now it's also kind of like a tech conference, but it started more as kind of like a cutting edge music. So the North American version is Mutec and started 25 years ago. And when I was at a very early age, I actually played in the Mexico edition of that festival. So it just came to my mind, like, okay, something like the Mutec is missing in Japan. So that's how I embarked into partnering with Takeo and another friend called Shu. And we started the festival here in Japan. But coincidentally, in 2015-16, it was just right after our back then Facebook bought Oculus for $2 billion. And almost in parallel to the first crypto wave, a lot of startups of AR, VR started raising a lot of money and everybody started trying to build. So this kind of like hype also touched Mutech because Mutech is all about creating art with emerging media. The Mutech artists wanted to really experiment with VR and AR, but the barrier of entry was way too high because it was not just learning a new software or learning a new instrument. It's a new discipline. Like you need to learn to program in Unity or Unreal Engine, understand a lot of mathematics, physics, 3D, and so on and so forth to create something in XR, basically, that is compelling. So that's how we came about. Okay, so there's a niche here. How do we leverage our knowledge and what we have with Mutech as a community into something that can help disseminate and propagate immersive content widely? That's how we came up with, okay, let's build a company. And the name Mawari came naturally because I was just bugging, like, okay, so we started this in Japan, needs to be a Japanese name. So come with a word that represents what we believe in, but that is short, is very Japanese, and sounds like a startup. That was kind of like the requirement, you know? And in the end, after 6 hours, okay, Mawari, I was like, okay, that sounds good. And Mawari means, it has many contexts, but it means your surroundings, look around, or anything that is, yeah, basically that philosophy of what you just explained in my post.
That's so cool. And my parallel there to that, Luis, is that when I named my first company back in 2016, Norio Ventures, Norio happened to be an anagram of the word Orion. And I was going to call it Orion Ventures, but that was so just widely used because Orion is the hunter, the constellation, and hunter is a family name. And I've always felt like a hunter going to look for new ideas, new way to do things, investments, so on. That I said, well, let's change Orion around. And I came up with Norio and just played with a bunch of letters. And Norio turns out to be Japanese for person of principle or man of principle. Mm-hmm. And that like stood with me big time because that's always been one of my big beliefs as well, is that you need to base everything you're doing on a core set of principles. So great to hear that parallel there. You mentioned math and physics, and I saw that your education would back all that up. And when you were getting to Tokyo on the music phase and coming up with this idea through Mutech, through meeting your co-founders, were the math and physics always an undercurrent there for you? Was that always just there waiting to kind of burst out while you were so engrossed in the musical side of things?
Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, okay. Also, I did a lot of work on data science anyways, not just music, because, living as an electronic musician is tough. So, of course, I did other type of jobs, digital marketing, data science. But yeah, a little bit more of background. I did go to a very special program that it was more about theoretical math and thinking outside the box. So it was kind of like going to Cambridge and study with a genius, because the full course for 4 years, it was just mathematics from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And everything was about like, okay, so let's create theory and let's create new things versus, okay, how do we apply the math to something? I mean, my parents at the time were very obsessed because that's very useless in a way. And I gave up a spot on computer science because I just got hooked with mathematics.
Okay.
But now our CEO, Fred, says that that's the reason why, like, the concept per se of Mawari of decentralized compute with streaming and rendering is because I had that formation, actually, that I was able to connect the dots because I was taught to think outside the box in the end.
Absolutely critical. The more time you spend outside the box, the more you get used to being outside the box. And that's life, right?
Yeah.
Very cool. One of the things you also mentioned, Luis, in that post you did announcing the round was that you obviously steered the focus towards who you referred to as the real heroes behind this milestone, the team, right? And that how did you go about building the team and keeping everyone moving in the right direction from that point where you started with your co-founders back in 2017?
That's a very unique question and a good one because it's the first time I will answer it in this context. So after Takun and I started the company, we met Alex, which is our CTO and co-founder. I actually met him online. Like literally, we were recruiting for a CTO, and we just went to Upwork and did an RFP, and he actually showed up very professionally. And it was about actually making a 3D model with some sort of logic and programming so it could be played on WebGL. And I got many prototypes, but what he delivered was a finished product. And that really sparked my interest because either this guy is a multi-talented genius or there's a team behind him. And it turned out to be the two, actually, that he's a genius, but he also had a team and very well trained with culture and everything ready to execute. After we had a couple of successful projects, I just invited him to Tokyo and he's like, do you want to join Mawari? We have this going on in Tokyo. And he said yes, luckily. And that was one of those catalyzing factors because from 3-person startup, once he joined us actually formally, he had actually a team behind that was already well trained. And when you need to move fast, and especially in a startup, if you build a team from scratch, it takes time to ramp up. And that was not the case. That's the first story of the team. The other interesting thing that I can say about after we raised, and of course we had to expand the team. Right now we are 23 full-time people, so we're not a small company per se anymore. And it's because 3D graphics, network, and all that we're doing sounds fancy, but it's actually really, really, really complicated. So Alex and I created a couple of designs that are patented, and we went ahead and implemented them with the existing team, but we needed more brains and more heads. And I think the main reason why we have a very successful and powerful team, even though we're very lean, is because we are really changing the status quo here. The 3D content is rendered on game engines. And game engines were designed to actually render into a pixel. And they render with one GPU or processing unit on device, and the device is connected wired to the display. So the first thing that we did is, okay, we have a remote server and we have a remote display. So we're cutting the wire, right? And the data that goes into that wire is a pixel because it's already ready for the display to be there. So cutting the wire adds a lot of risk on latency because this needs to be ultra low latency. Second, AR to be native needs to be fully in 3D. So it means that instead of streaming pixels, we need to stream 3D. We need to stream geometry and all the other elements that compose a 3D content. At the time, Alex was like, you're crazy. Because it was really kind of reinventing the wheel and with a very small team. But we did it. And then, we created, at the time, we call it like the Mawari way of thinking towards 3D graphics. Because we also had a lot of interviews with very talented people, but since they've been doing 3D graphics for the longest time, it was very hard for them to, okay, so we are challenging what is the status quo and try to change how 3D content is rendered and streamed. To summarize it, it's kind of like the Matrix. Either you take the blue pill or the red pill.
Yeah.
And if you take the red pill, you're in. And basically, we have very, very, very talented engineers that understood the vision and understood the potential of actually changing this. And I can tell you that the way the XR industry is going, I'm quite pleased to say that actually it was the right decision, because pixel streaming is not scalable and sustainable for how we imagine Minority Report, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, pixel streaming versus streaming geometry. Like you said, that is a big difference, and that you do need a bunch of people to take the red pill to get their head around that, right?
Yeah. And so I would say that the two elements is like this radical thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging the status quo. But second is, thanks to Alex, there has been a very strong foundation and engineering discipline. It's kind of like this, our CEO call it that dynamic tension, because he's very structured, very strong engineering principles. And then I challenge thinking outside the box and connecting dots from very different places. And so we have that tension. Like, okay, Alex sometimes says, yeah, that's possible, but not possible. Since I have a background also in computer science, although I went more into the math major, I can challenge that and say, well, what about if we try this? What about if we try this? And that's how we actually made the patent, because it was a back and forth challenge between the two of us.
Very good. Very good. And you're adding more fuel to the fire for me, Luis, because when you and I first spoke about my interest in this space, and that, you know, the 2020, 2021 period was very much fueled by this intersection between AR, VR, as well as Web3 and blockchain. And that I got very excited about that back in 2020, 2021, and did a lot of reading. Actually, not a lot of reading. I watched probably too many movies, and got very excited about the Hollywood version of what this would all look like. And then I grounded my thinking by doing some real reading and reading into what is the basis of all this. But it was Matthew Ball's book, The Metaverse and How It Will Revolutionize Everything, that got me really thinking about the gaming side of this and where it's all coming from. And that we're going to need to do a lot in terms of moving data at twice the speed of light. If you've got a server in New York, but you're actually the user on the ground in Tokyo, the speed at which you need to move all that data means that latency, it's impossible to remove it, because it's just geographically, and moving data that fast is just, you can't move it at twice the speed of light. So I saw that bottleneck. And so 2021, 22, got into 22, and I'm just like, all right, I'm going to park this whole idea of investing in that space. When I met you and saw what you're doing with decentralized compute and moving the rendering out to the edges, that's where I said, boop, they've got it. They figured it out. But in your words, can you tell us what Mawari is and how you talk about it when you're talking to stakeholders, when you're talking to potential users and customers?
Okay, yeah. So what Mawari is, we are a platform that enabled immersive content to be delivered at scale. That's kind of like the simple way to say it. And it consists on two things that I call them also the yin and yang in the post, which is the Mawari engine, which is all the technology behind changing the status quo of rendering and how to stream it. That's the Mawari engine. And then the Mawari Network is how to scale this. So we spent almost 6 years in stealth mode building this streaming technology. And we started gaining traction in the US with some important clients. And they requested, okay, can you scale this use case to 100,000 users or more? Then we went to hyperscalers. We even partnered with AWS. We were the first streaming platform for XR in Wavelength, which was one of the edge attempts of the hyperscalers. But they couldn't help. They didn't have that enough distributed GPUs in place so that it would work. So that's when, okay, so do we stay in stealth mode and we wait for someone to figure this out? That's the other value and the spirit of Mawari, that we're renegades and we challenge the status quo. So I started reading, making research, and came across Render and Helium. And that to me was like very inspiring. It's like, okay, it is possible to create a supply that is more distributed without a big capital expenditure and really through a power of community. And that's when I was like, Web3 is the way to go. It took a time for the team to actually assimilate it because, Web3 had a bad connotation even back in 2022. But it's what I told my co-founders, if you see behind the smoke and mirrors, there's actually something very valuable and substantial there, because there are companies like Helium that, they're going to become the biggest network of IoT and now potentially also of mobile phones, and they have contracts with big enterprises. So why don't we go that way? And so we joined Outlier Ventures, and that's when we finally solidify the vision, architecture of what we needed to do to scale our streaming technology. So in a way, yeah, we also say that we are deeping before even deeping was coined. And it's a deeping by purpose or necessity. We need the distributed compute, but in order to have distributed compute, one player cannot do it all. So we need the participation of many stakeholders. And the only way to align and keep everyone in check is through a trustless, decentralized billing system, which that's where blockchain or now deep income comes in.
It's the perfect use case there. So many of the propositions that have come to market with this crossover between blockchain and extended reality that just don't make sense, right? But this is where it does make a heck of a lot of sense. And when I talk to people about Mawari and I tell them how excited I got when I saw the problem that you're solving, the bottleneck that you're removing, the question that a couple people asked me was, is that what you figured out, that the only way to really, as you said, stream geometry is to do it closer to where the end user actually physically is?
That's one of the elements. Of course, proximity matters because it's real-time rendering, but also there are other things to take into account. And this is part of the Mawari engine per se and how we design it, because networks are never perfect, right? All these theories about 5G being the perfect match for AR and VR, they are good in laboratory environments. Like, okay, let's imagine 100 megabits per second that get moved at the speed of light, as you say, through 5G. But if you are in the city, you are sharing that 5G connection with thousands of people. So there's no data stability. So that's the other breakthrough that we have here at Mawari, is that it's not just about the streaming geometry, but it's the approach of that we call it object streaming, or now we call it the spatial streaming, actually, that is really related to mixed reality. Is that pixel streaming stream the entire world or the entire scene into a frame. And of course, since the frame, as I mentioned, the screen comes to your eyes, the camera in the device need to be synchronized with the camera on the remote server. So of course, it becomes very vulnerable of latency. So how do we break this? Is by splitting the rendering.
I get that. And it feels very much like being able to imagine what the solution looks like and then figuring out the engineering to deliver that. The ability to do that sounds like it is a personality trait that runs strong throughout the team, almost to say, well, we know that we want to get to Mars, and what does the rocket ship look like to get us there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because that was a requirement. Okay, we need to stream the objects. We need to remove latency and that dependency. Because as I explained, if you stream the object and the locally scene is being rendered, even the T-Mobile CTO called it non-perceived latency. Because there is a latency, but it's not implicit anymore, because you are seeing something that's being rendered in parallel versus linearly.
I gotcha. Speaking of personality traits, Luis, you talked about being a renegade and the team itself being renegades and challenging the status quo and thinking outside the box. What are some of the other personality traits that you yourself that you leaned on to get through some of what might have been the dark days
Well, I guess she's being stubborn
Okay.
and persistent. And that probably comes a little bit with the background of the co-founders, because starting a startup in Tokyo is not the same as starting a startup in Silicon Valley, in which you already have a formula per se. And okay, and even the philosophy is fail fast and improve, and it's okay to fail, and failures are actually celebrated. In Japan, failure is not celebrated. It's the other
No.
way around.
Yeah.
So always Mawari is either we do it or we do it, otherwise we die. And that's one of the principles, is that we were very stubborn, that even when there were rough times, it's like we just need to push, we need to push until, and being very creative with cash flow. That resilience per se is what got us here. And now, 7 years after, I mean, we are one of the few AR companies that is still out there from the 2017 cohort. And we've seen already 2 waves of startups come up, die, come up, die. So we have a lot of, now knowledge about the industry, what really works, where is the lowest hanging fruit for monetization. There's a lot of know-how acquired on how to go to market because of this.
Oh, absolutely. Were there any days where you thought you might not make it?
I mean, I would say the life of an entrepreneur is always like that. Like,
Yeah.
it sounds glorious, but there's always days of self-doubt, and it's just a normal cycle, and and they are sanity checks. And again, if it was not for the team and the co-founders I have, probably we wouldn't have made it. But everybody is very aligned in being very stubborn in that sense, that we need to make this work. So I would say also we learned how to do calculated risks. Now the calculated risks are more precise than before. So that also helps.
Interesting. Is that stubbornness and combined with persistence the reason why you said, yes, even though we started in 2017, we're not going to raise or start raising until 2022 when you closed your first round of 6.5 million with your seed round in February of 2023? Was that stubborn persistence saying we're not going to go out and raise until we know we really have something here?
We did try racing before, but we realized, okay, it's too early and we're not ready.
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, it is. I know it's very discouraging that you get a nose, but it's true. Like also in there are a lot of literature that, okay, so maybe until you've pitched 100 VCs is when you finally close your first round. It's true. I mean,
Yep.
and you learn through that process.
Yep, you do. You do. And, talking to founders recently, it's great to hear you say 100, because that's what I always say to founders as well, who are like, oh, I've talked to 20 and I'm not getting anywhere. I'm like, go back and tell me when you got 100 and you haven't gotten anywhere yet. And that's when, you're thinking differently. Learning about that 100 would have been a big thing, obviously, when you went through this the first time. And what else do you think you learned in raising the seed round that made raising this next round less daunting?
Since we were a more mature company, it was always like, okay, so we know where we're going. There's a very specific roadmap, and there's no false expectations. Because with XR, we know it's a long-term bet, and it's very transparent communication to our partners and investors and the team. It's not really like, okay, so let's make a business plan that is a 3-year break even and also good. No, it's like the industry is at this stage. We're enabling the industry to accelerate, but it will still take time, because while we're solving one of the bottlenecks, there are other dependencies like the glasses technology, which now it is the right timing. So what we learned is really, when is the right timing. We happened to raise in 2022, announced it in 2023, and we just saw that, okay, so the release of Quest 3 Apple Vision Pro. And as we have partners, we saw the maturity of the industry, that it was very different to 2017 or even 2021. We knew that was the time, and this is why we decided to go on to the next round versus just staying a little bit more on stealth per se.
Yeah. The time is definitely now. What did you learn in raising this most recent round that you wish you knew the first time around that would have made raising the seed round a bit easier?
Well, when I first started raising the seed, it's just all about like the big picture, clear and specific, transparent communication. Where do you want to go? Like, just like you say on the engineering, it's like, we want to go to Mars, and this is how we're going to get to Mars, and this is what it will take. So if you have that mind map and you show it to an investor, it's pretty impressive, because even if the plan is wrong, it means you made your homework.
Yep. I spoke with a guy called Mark McLaughlin, who's an Irish entrepreneur, a few weeks ago. And I asked him, what was it that he thought finally allowed him to turn the corner when it came to being able to raise? And he said it was when he stopped pitching what he thought investors wanted to hear and just started pitching what they were building and what their vision was. And that was it. And that once you get to that mentality of, this is what I'm doing, you want in? It's sometimes a hard place to get to, because just you get so much feedback on your approach, your deck, your messaging, all of that from so many different people with what people think VCs want to hear. But then it just comes back to you and the team and what you're doing and what you're building and what your vision is. And just being able to communicate that clearly with conviction. And I know you've definitely learned that. You figured that out.
It is a process, yes. And every investor is very different. They have different theses, they have different parameters. So there's no golden advice. And every startup is unique in the end. So that's true. It's sticking in with the vision. Throughout this process, I had very good advice in terms of positioning and how to approach this. But in the end, it's always staying with the same vision and no pivots per se, because this is a long term.
Absolutely. And then back to your post announcing the round, and the context of talking through this with you, Luis, is very interesting, because this is your strategic round. You've raised seed. You've now raised the next round, 17.3 million in total across the two rounds. But you know that there's a long road ahead, and that you use the term milestone, right? And that a few times that really levels the playing field for everybody, because you're saying, let's celebrate now, but it's one step on the journey, right? Mm-hmm. And that let's get back to work. And, you know, when the money's in the bank, it makes it a lot easier to do that. What is the next big milestone that Mawari is aiming for?
Well, it's actually in the short term, and it's achieving decentralization and how we're going to and bootstrapping the supply. So how are we going to do this is through a node license sale. We were thinking doing it probably in Q4 this year, not defined yet. But yeah, that's a big next step. It's like, okay, so now we have the team, the technology, the partners, clients. Now we need the help of the community to really bootstrap that supply. That's the next big milestone. And from there, we're going to mainnet and really to scale the 3D internet.
Yeah. Absolutely. That is a big thing. You've built all the core technology, and now it's decentralizing it, getting it out there so that you can deliver on the promise of the end result. And definitely very cool. I'm going to end this conversation, Luis, the same way I end with everybody, which is to ask the one final question. What is one thing that people wouldn't expect to know about you?
That's a fair question. I mean, I can say a couple things. Maybe I speak Japanese.
Okay, very good.
Because I lived in Japan for so long, and again, starting a startup in Japan, you need to learn Japanese. In the end, is not that easy. We already commented that my background is in electronic music, so that's probably something that not many people know. Yeah,
how did you go about learning Japanese? Obviously, you live there, and like you said, being a startup in Tokyo, in Japan, you kind of have to be able to get by with a language that's spoken on the ground. So, but did you do like Duolingo? Was it just conversational? Did you do actually classroom type lessons or online lessons? How did you do it?
It's the school of survival, I guess. It's like you need to run the startup, and at the same time, you need to understand legal accounting. And my co-founder really pushing not speaking to me in English. And then also my wife is like just so two schools. It's not a formal school, but it's really kind of like being thrown into a pool of sharks and just learning how to swim well.
They say being a founder is like jumping out of an airplane and learning to knit a parachute on the way down, but learning Japanese is like being thrown into a pool of sharks and learning how to swim.
Yes. Well, building a startup.
Building a startup after jumping out of the airplane and learning to knit a parachute and learning to swim at the same time. So, and staying away from the sharks, which is fantastic. All right. Well, Luis, listen, that's a great place to end it. So thank you so much for joining me for this chat. And I'm really looking forward to big things to come from Mawari and from you.
Thank you. Likewise. This was great. Just one last comment. I do want to double down on the team. And I have said that to them privately, but in the end, everybody is a rock star and plays a very important piece. We're a very lean team. But again, without streaming technology, we cannot scale the network. And without the network, we cannot scale the streaming technology. So it's really kind of like finally we have that dream team, I would say. So thank you to everyone for making this happen. The milestone is theirs, not mine.
Yep, I'm with you. And it's so wonderful to be a part of this. And this conversation has even drove that point further down the rabbit hole for me. So thank you.
That's cool. Thank you.
That does it for this week, folks. Thanks to Luis Ramirez for opening up his mind to help us figure out why he does what he does. Check out the show notes on moneyneversleeps.ie for all the relevant links to learn more about Luis and Mawari. If you like what you heard, please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify as it helps others to find the show. Also, thanks to Conan Brophy from Create Sound for mixing and editing this episode. Conan is an excellent media man to get in touch with when you're thinking about launching your own podcast. As for me, I'm an early-stage startup investor focused on where fintech meets crypto and crypto meets Web3, and I lead the Techstars Web3 Accelerator. Applications are open now for our spring 2025 class, so check us out on techstars.com/accelerators/Web3 to apply. There are plenty of links in the show notes on moneyneversleeps.ie on how to get in touch, so don't hesitate to reach out. Finally, till next time, thanks for listening. See ya!